After about a year of working at a behavioral hospital, I thought I'd seen it all. Every kind of meltdown, every unimaginable scenario, it all started to blur together. But then Mike walked in, and he made sure I'd never think that way again. It started like any other day. The usual hum of the hospital surrounded me, the buzz of the front desk, the low murmur of patients in the day room, and the occasional crackle of the intercom announcing staff movements. But when the doors swung open that afternoon and Mike arrived, escorted by 2 exhausted police officers, I could feel the shift in the air. Mike was barefoot, his feet caked in dirt and grime, and his wild eyes darted around the room as if scanning for threats. His body was drenched in sweat, the fabric of his hospital gown sticking to his skin, and the smell, God, the smell. It was sharp and sour, the kind of odor that stays with you long after the source is gone. If you've ever worked in this field, you know there are smells you eventually learn to ignore. This wasn't one of them. The officers handed over his paperwork to the RN, their faces drained of energy. "Good luck," one of them muttered before heading back out. I glanced at the admitting note, psychosis, likely off meds. There was also a history of drug use scrawled in the margins. Surprisingly, Mike was cooperative at first. He mumbled something about messages from the other side as he followed the nurse into the intake room. I didn't think much of it. Strange mutterings were pretty par for the course. I figured this was just another challenging patient, nothing I hadn't seen before. But 5 minutes later, we heard it. A loud bang. The sound echoed down the hallway, sharp and jarring. I froze, locking eyes with my coworker. Neither of us spoke, but we didn't have to. We both knew what that sound meant. We sprinted down the hall and burst into the intake room, bracing ourselves for whatever chaos awaited us. But honestly, nothing could have prepared me for what we walked into. Mike was standing in the center of the room, completely naked. His body was tense, his movements erratic, and everywhere, on the walls, the floor, even the ceiling, was poop. On one wall, in giant smeared letters, he had written, "Fuck you." On the opposite wall, he'd drawn an enormous pentagram, the lines jagged and uneven, but unmistakable. The air was thick with the stench, so strong it made my eyes water. My coworker gagged immediately, bolting back down the hall to call for backup. I just stood there, frozen in place, trying to process what I was seeing. And then Mike turned to me. His hands, his poop-covered hands, were raised high above his head like he was summoning something. His wild eyes locked onto mine, and he said, "The devil made me do it. He told me you'd understand." I tried to respond, but no words came out. What could I even say to that? Mike started pacing the room, tracking poop with every step. He muttered incoherently, phrases about cleansing the room and opening the portal. Every few seconds, he'd stop, point to the pentagram, and scream, "The answer is in the mark." I tried to talk him down, keeping my voice calm, but nothing I said seemed to register. He was locked in his own reality. And then, as if the situation couldn't get worse, he pressed his bare, poop-covered body against the wall and began sliding across it, smearing the pentagram even further. I stood there, torn between horror and disbelief. Part of me wanted to laugh. It was so absurd, but the smell and the sheer intensity of the moment kept me grounded. Finally, the backup arrived. A team of techs and nurses, fully gloved and masked, entered the room with practiced precision. They worked to de-escalate the situation, speaking calmly as they edged closer to Mike. He resisted at first, yelling about the portal and the devil, but eventually they managed to get him into paper scrubs and escort him to the seclusion room. As they led him away, he turned to me one last time, his eyes wide and his voice booming. "You'll thank me when the portal opens." And just like that, he was gone, leaving behind a scene of absolute devastation. I stood in the intake room staring at the walls, the smeared pentagram, the footprints leading everywhere. The smell still hung in the air, sharp and unforgiving. Working on the psych floor had shown me a lot, extremes of human behavior that most people couldn't even imagine. But this was something else entirely. As I left the room and headed back to the nurse's station, I couldn't shake his words. I kept wondering what the next shift would bring, what new portal would open. Because if there's one thing I've learned in this job, it's this. The psych floor doesn't just test your patience. It rewrites your definition of what's possible.